My parents locked me out in a snowstorm, toasted my disappearance. 3 days later, 63 messages begged for silence, but my reply left them speechless. Hi, I'm Tarun, and 3 days ago my parents left me outside in a snowstorm, locked the door, raised their wine glasses, and laughed through the window while my sister mouthed, "Freeze to death, worthless idiot." They thought I'd disappear like I always did. But this time, I didn't. I found the emails where they removed me from the will. I found the photos where they'd cropped me out. I found the video proof of what they said when they thought no one was watching. Now my inbox is flooded with 63 messages begging me to stay quiet. But tell me, how do you stay silent when your own family tries to erase you? I hadn't driven back to Neighborville in months, maybe longer. The streets look the same, quiet, manicured, cold in that Midwestern way where the frost starts in your lungs before it even hits your skin. The forecast had warned about a snowstorm. I didn't flinch. Storms I could handle. It was the silence that scared me more. The radio played some tired holiday tune as I parked 2 houses down from my parents' place. Their driveway was full, Bryn's SUV, Dad's Ford, some unfamiliar Lexus I assumed belonged to one of Mom's church friends. I killed the engine and stared at the pie sitting in the passenger seat, still warm. The card on top read, "Happy birthday, Mom," in handwriting that tried too hard not to look nervous. I thought about turning around. Then I remembered why I came in the first place. After the fallout with my client in Chicago, the silence in my apartment had gotten louder than ever. I needed to feel like I still belonged somewhere. Home was supposed to be that place. Even if we hadn't spoken much lately, I told myself maybe this snow would melt something in us all. I adjusted my coat, grabbed the pie, and walked toward the front door. Laughter drifted through the living room window. Bryn's voice, always just a few decibels too loud, followed by Mom's chuckle. Familiar sounds, painfully distant. I rang the doorbell. The pause was longer than it should have been. Then the door opened, and there stood Dad, eyebrows pulled tight like he'd just been asked to pay for someone else's mistake. "Tarun," he said, voice flat. No hug, no warmth. Just my name like it was a question he hadn't expected to ask today. "Hi," I replied, lifting the pie slightly like a peace offering. "I made this for Mom. Thought I'd surprise her." He didn't move. "This is a family gathering," he said slowly, the words dragging like cold syrup. I blinked. "I am family." A beat passed. Then from over his shoulder, Bryn's voice floated in. "Dad, it's fine. Just tell her we didn't plan for her." He didn't look back. Just shifted his weight and said, "You should have called." Behind him, I saw my mother raise a glass and toast. Her head turned slightly, made eye contact with me through the space between Dad's arm and the frame. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I drove 2 hours," I murmured. "You knew it was her birthday." Dad exhaled. "This isn't the time, Tarun." And just like that, the door closed. The pie stayed in my hands. I stood on the porch, frozen, not from the wind, but from the clarity that settled in my chest. They didn't forget me. They chose to pretend I wasn't needed. I placed the pie gently on the welcome mat like it meant anything anymore and turned back toward the street. That's when a voice whispered behind me. A cousin I barely recognized stood near the hedge, red cup in hand, fake cheer in her eyes. "You know," she said casually, "I remember when they were thinking about adopting someone else before you. I mean, guess it all worked out?" The world slowed. That old memory I had dismissed, me at 7 years old, overhearing Mom say, "This one will do," flared back to life. I thought she meant the dress I was wearing that Easter. Now I wondered if she meant me. That walk back to my car was the longest 100 feet I'd taken in years. By the time I reached it, snow had started to fall, light at first, soft, almost kind, but the air bit my skin, and my hands trembled as I reached for the door. All the other cars were tucked safely in the driveway. Mine sat alone on the street like a guest that overstayed a welcome never given. I slipped inside, let the silence hit me, then stared ahead through the windshield. "I came here looking for warmth," I whispered, and walked straight into winter. My phone buzzed. A text lit up the screen, "Bryn, don't make a scene, okay?" I didn't reply. I just stared at the message and realized the blizzard wasn't just outside. The snow hadn't stopped. It gathered along the edges of the windshield like it was trying to press itself into the car with me. I sat still, engine off, fingers clutched around the steering wheel. Even though I wasn't going anywhere, I thought about turning the car back on, about heading straight to the interstate and driving home. But home had become a flexible word. Chicago felt cold in its own way, but at least its indifference wasn't personal. What happened tonight? That was tailored, deliberate, meant to sting in a way no city lights ever could. I finally blinked myself out of the trance, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. No one looked out the window. No one came after me. I didn't go far. Just to a roadside motel off the highway, the kind with dated wallpaper and carpets that smelled like melted ice. It wasn't much, but it had heat. I dropped my bag, kept my coat on, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Memories came slow, like bruises surfacing under skin. But they didn't arrive sharp. They arrived foggy, incomplete, not because I'd forgotten them, but because they were never clear to begin with. Most of my childhood wasn't filled with outright cruelty. It was filled with vagueness, missed glances, conversations that trailed off when I entered the room, hugs offered to others before me. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't scream, it whispers. And when people ignore you long enough, you start assigning them kindness they never earned just to make the silence easier to survive. That thought stayed with me as I showered, changed into pajamas, and curled into bed. I stared at the motel ceiling like it had answers, or at least something softer than what I'd walked away from. Morning didn't bring clarity, just more snow. I checked out early, telling the front desk clerk I'd be back for the receipt later. My car was crusted in white by the time I reached it. I turned the heat up, sat there, and watched the house from a distance. They wouldn't be expecting me. I wasn't supposed to be part of anything anymore. I parked around the block and walked back toward the house, pretending to search for something in my pockets in case a neighbor saw me. I rang the doorbell, waited, then opened the mailbox and pretended I'd come for mail. No one answered, so I slipped around to the side yard. The back porch light was off, but the kitchen window glowed warm. The birthday decorations were still taped up inside, balloons slightly deflated, banner slightly crooked. It all looked like a playset after the final act. And then I saw it sitting on top of the garbage bin just outside the fence, the wooden music box. I made that thing when I was 12 in a school workshop. Sanded the corners myself. Carved her initials on the inside. Mom had once called it the only thing I ever made that mattered. Guess it didn't matter anymore. I picked it up, brushed off a patch of snow, and opened the lid. It still played a slow, broken version of You Are My Sunshine. I stood there in the cold, listening, not to the tune, but to the silence that came after it. The absence of her keeping it. The absence of her carrying it was gone. It wasn't the sound that broke me. It was how easy it had been for her to toss it out. No hesitation. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because the pain felt too old to cry about, like crying would be admitting it surprised me. I returned to the car, the music box on my lap like some haunted relic. The heater was still warm, the dashboard blinking steady. A line came to mind, something I'd heard in a documentary once about narcissistic parents: some people aren't cruel by accident. They're just polite about it. I stared straight ahead, then picked up my phone. Hey, I said into the receiver. Do you still have access to public records? I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I woke up before my alarm, not that I'd set one. I just couldn't sleep past 7 when my head was buzzing like a downed power line. The music box from yesterday sat on the motel nightstand like a quiet accusation. I didn't touch it, didn't open it. I just got dressed and checked my phone. There it was, a text from the family group thread I hadn't seen in over a year. Brunch at the house. 11 sharp. Bring your favorite story about mom. No mention of me directly, not even a courtesy nudge, but someone had forgotten to remove my number. I stared at the screen for a long time. They didn't want me there, clearly, but I wasn't coming to be wanted. I needed to see if they'd act like I didn't exist in front of a table full of witnesses. By 10:45, I was parked 2 doors down again, heart thudding with something between resolve and foolishness. I didn't bother texting anyone, just walked up, knocked, and waited. Bryn answered. She looked surprised for a second, then slipped into that shiny, socially polished voice she always used when she wasn't sure what mask to wear. "Oh, hey. I didn't know you were, come on in. We're just getting things started." The way she stepped aside was hesitant, like I was a neighbor dropping off a dish, not her sister. The living room was filled with laughter, the smell of cinnamon rolls and overbrewed coffee, the kind of warmth reserved for holiday commercials. My mother was holding court in the kitchen like a seasoned hostess. No one said my name when I walked in. A few nods, a quick hi from a cousin, nothing more. I hovered by the wall until someone finally asked, "Tarun, would you mind helping plate the muffins?" It wasn't even a request. It was muscle memory, assigning me the job no one else wanted. "Sure," I said, smiling as sweetly as I could without choking on it. I always did love earning my place. I took the tray, carried it into the dining room. There were 10 place settings, 10 chairs. I stood there quietly counting. I was number 11. No chair for me. I looked over at the head of the table. Bryn was already seated. Dad next to her. My name wasn't on a card, not on a napkin, not on anything. I found an extra stool near the counter and sat there with my plate balanced on my lap. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, but they pretended not to. That seemed to be the family sport. As they went around sharing mom moments, I remembered every party where I'd set up the decorations but wasn't in the photos. Every time someone said, "Let Bryn do the speech," or "Tarun's better behind the scenes." I wasn't forgotten. I was kept quiet. The conversation drifted to lighter topics: travel, church, local politics. Then one of my uncles, Mom's younger brother, who thought he was funnier than he was wise, looked right at me and smirked. "Well, as long as Tarun doesn't call CPS again, we're good, right?" The table burst into laughter except me. I stared at him. My fork paused midair. He kept chuckling. "Kidding. Kidding." It was years ago. I was 10. 10 years old when I found Bryn crying in the hallway, her arm bruised and her lip split. She'd begged me not to say anything. I called social services anyway. It was handled, they said, internally. Nothing official. But from that moment on, I wasn't the protector. I was the problem, the dramatic one, the one who made things worse. They hadn't forgotten that. They just tucked it behind every joke and every cold shoulder. I looked at the coffee in my mug, still full, untouched. It had gone cold. I told the truth, and they rewrote the story without me in it. I stood up slowly. The room kept talking like I hadn't moved. I leaned forward, hands on the table, and spoke loud enough for every single fork to still. "Do you all remember what really happened?" My voice didn't tremble. Because I do. The table went still. My voice, the one that had just disrupted the room with a truth no one wanted replayed, now hung in the air like smoke after a match is struck. No one moved. No one said a word. It was as if I'd broken something fragile and sacred, like the illusion we'd all quietly agreed to protect. My father cleared his throat, shifted in his seat. His napkin was crumpled in his lap, clenched like he'd wrung it dry. "Well," he muttered, "that's not exactly how I remember it." And there it was, the first crack of the gaslight. My mother spoke next, soft, smooth, with that smile she wore like a badge of control. "Tarun, no one remembers it like that, sweetie. You were just emotional back then." I didn't blink. Bryn leaned forward, elbows on the table like she was ready to de-escalate a customer service complaint. "We thought you got help for those episodes. Didn't you say you were talking to someone?" I looked her dead in the eye. "You mean the therapist I saw because I was told I imagined things that actually happened?" She looked away. "No one's accusing you of lying." "Sure feels like someone is." They went back to cutting pancakes and sipping lukewarm coffee like I'd interrupted a sitcom rerun and they were just waiting for the remote to start working again. I excused myself, not because I was done, but because I was no longer interested in speaking into a room designed to drown me out. On the way to the bathroom, I paused in the hallway. Framed photos lined the wall like curated evidence of unity. Except something felt off. The beach photo from that trip to Hilton Head, where I distinctly remember being between Dad and Bryn, now only showed the two of them with a decorative seashell in the middle where I'd stood. Another one from a holiday dinner had my head turned awkwardly to the side. And yet another, a group shot from a church function, had been cropped so tightly it sliced off my shoulder entirely. It wasn't just coincidence. It was intentional, strategic. They didn't just forget me, they edited me out. Later, sitting in my car with the heat turned all the way up, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face, still flushed from what I just witnessed, told me what I needed to know. They had erased me digitally, visually, emotionally, and they were so practiced they did it without flinching. A gut instinct told me to dig deeper. I logged into the shared family drive from my phone. There, nestled in a folder labeled Dad's Retirement Tribute, were several video clips. I remembered filming mine in my old apartment. I'd written out notes, recorded it twice, made sure the lighting was decent. I clicked on the final version labeled Final Cut for Event. I watched it once, then again. My part wasn't there. Gone. Cleanly removed. No trace. I texted my cousin Leia, who was always on tech duty for family stuff. Hey, quick question. Why wasn't my video in the tribute? Her reply came fast. Bryn said your audio was corrupted. She didn't want to stress you about it. Of course, she didn't. I didn't reply. I just stared at the phone screen, the weight of the message louder than the words themselves. They didn't want my voice. They wanted my silence. And for a long time, I gave it to them because I thought staying quiet meant keeping peace. Turns out it just helped them sleep. I opened my laptop right there in the car, fingers moving without hesitation. A folder labeled Evidence was already in place, started last night out of instinct. I dragged the cropped photos in, screenshotted the drive folder, copied Leia's text. Each file had a name: Eraser C1. Eraser U2. Suppression Text U1. They didn't want me in their story. Fine. I'd write my own. Then I clicked into an older email, one from 6 months ago, a forwarded legal document, updated will draft 2. I hadn't noticed it then, hadn't thought to open the attachment. Now I did. The PDF loaded slowly. My name was nowhere on it, not as beneficiary, not as alternate contact, not even a mention. They'd written me out of the future, too. My jaw tightened. If they didn't want me in their history, that's fine. I'll make my own. But first, let's see what they've really been hiding. The coffee shop smelled like burnt beans and vanilla syrup. A wall of windows looked out onto Main Street where snow was falling in lazy, directionless swirls. I sat near the back, laptop open, headphones in, not for music, but to ward off conversation. No one would bother a woman with headphones hunched over a screen, especially one wearing the same clothes for the second day straight. I replayed the retirement video again. Dad's voice came through first, then Bryn, a few neighbors, the church pastor, a smooth edit with background music and polished fades. My segment wasn't there. It didn't surprise me anymore. What surprised me was how calm I felt watching it. I closed the video, opened the shared family drive, and clicked through folders, photos, documents, spreadsheets, until I hit one titled Estate Planning Final Drafts. Inside, I found it, an email thread accidentally forwarded to me 6 months ago and long ignored. Subject line: Don't CC her. She might sniff it out. I opened it with both hands resting on the table like I was preparing to receive a punch. The thread was between Mom, Dad, and Bryn, pages long, updates to the will, redistribution of property, tax advice, and 2 lines that hollowed something in my chest: let's not reward the one who always thinks she's the victim. Frame it around her choosing distance. It'll sound cleaner. They were planning the fallout before the blow ever landed. I didn't cry, didn't curse. I just downloaded every file, named each one, printed 2 hard copies. I'd stopped expecting apologies. But this was a strategy, and I knew how to respond to strategies. I closed the laptop and walked out into the snow, my breath forming thick clouds. Across the street, a banner hung outside the local library: Legacy starts with you. The irony made me snort. I didn't go back to the motel right away. Instead, I drove to the county clerk's office. It was still early, only a few cars in the lot, The kind of quiet only government buildings on a Monday morning know. Inside, I approached the counter. "Hi," I said. "I'd like to request access to recent filings, property, wills, power of attorney, under the name Vera Shipman or Alton Kraft." The woman behind the desk, probably in her 60s, looked up at me. Recognition flickered behind her glasses. "Oh," she said, then paused. "I thought you were the niece or a cousin, maybe." I forced a smile. "No, I'm their daughter, the one they're trying to unwrite." She didn't ask questions, just handed me a clipboard and pointed to a terminal. 10 minutes later, I had confirmation. My name had been removed from all filings, no ownership rights, no executive status. I wasn't even listed as emergency contact. Just like that, I was legally distant. Emotionally, that happened years ago. I stepped outside and dialed Nicolette. "Hey," I said. "You still offer that free consult to traumatized old friends?" "Always," she replied. "What's going on?" "I think I need to know what legal options exist when your family replaces you with a paper trail." I returned to the motel late in the afternoon, stomach growling, fingers still tingling from the cold. I hadn't eaten all day. Didn't feel like eating now. The microwave beeped when I put in the leftover muffin from brunch. It stayed warm, untouched. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, scrolling through old voicemails. One from Grandma caught my eye, dated a month before she passed. I hit play. Her voice was raspy but clear. "Tarun, if anything ever happens, look in the old piano. You'll know which one. Not the one they pretend matters. The one in the back room. The one with the broken key." My chest tightened. The piano at her house. The one we weren't allowed to touch. The one with the faded sheet music and chipped pedal. "I think I know where this all really started," I whispered. I closed my eyes. This time I wasn't just opening a lid. I was lifting the cover on the truth. They say storms reveal more than they destroy. I believed that as I drove toward my parents' house that night, windshield wipers sweeping heavy flakes away like they were trying to erase the warning signs. The forecast had been clear: ice, wind, a whiteout by midnight. I packed the emails in a manila folder, zipped it in my coat, and told myself this was the kind of storm that might finally force a conversation. The lights were on when I pulled up. Laughter drifted faintly through the frosted glass. Warm yellow glow spilled from the kitchen windows like nothing had changed, like I hadn't read every word they wrote about removing me from their future. I rang the bell twice. No answer. I tried the knob, locked. I reached for my keys, slid one in, turned. Nothing. A click. Resistance. My key didn't work. I knocked louder. Still nothing. Then the porch light flicked on. Through the glass beside the door, I saw them, Mom, Dad, and Bryn, clustered around the dining table, wine glasses in hand. Bryn turned, made eye contact, and smiled like a cat watching a bird hit a window. She mouthed something, 3 words: freeze to death, then slower, clearer, worthless idiot. She tipped her glass toward me. Dad chuckled. Mom didn't even blink. The light stayed on. The door stayed shut. I stood there for another minute, coat collar high, wind slicing across my cheekbones, snow already layering my hair. Then I turned and walked back to my car. The driveway lights hummed behind me. By the time I climbed in, my fingers were so numb they fumbled the ignition. The engine whined twice before catching. I turned the heat to max and curled into the driver's seat, teeth chattering. My phone blinked, 4% battery. I opened the voice recorder and hit send to Nicolette's number. "If I don't make it through the night," I said, voice trembling, "tell them I wasn't crazy. I just loved the wrong people too long." The screen went dark before I could press stop. I curled up under my coat in the back seat, knees drawn tight, arms wrapped around myself like I could protect what was left. My breath fogged the windows. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, a choir of reminders that I was very much alone. I dozed in and out. Dreams twisted between memory and fear. I saw myself as a little girl huddled by the radiator in my room after being told not to touch the thermostat. I saw Bryn crying at the age of 9 with a bruise on her wrist and me holding a phone I wasn't sure I had the right to use. I heard Mom's voice, "You always make everything harder, Tarun." I saw Dad's shadow in the hallway and the way he never looked at me the same after that call. It wasn't just cold now. It was familiarity. This was a language I knew. Sometime after dawn, a knock shattered the silence, not on the window of my memory, but on the car itself. I jumped, startled. An older woman, bundled in a coat and scarf, stood outside, holding a flashlight. "You okay in there?" she asked. I rolled down the window an inch. My voice cracked. "I'm fine." "No, honey, you're not." She guided me inside her home across the street. Small, warm, filled with the scent of peppermint tea and something baking. Her name was Margot. I didn't ask more. She didn't ask what happened. Just wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, handed me a mug, and said, "Good people don't leave family outside in this kind of cold." I said nothing, just sipped the tea and stared at the steam rising from the mug like it was trying to rewrite what the snow had etched into my skin. When my hand stopped shaking, I pulled out my phone, plugged it into the charger she offered. It blinked awake. I opened my notes app, typed 3 words, "It's time." Tomorrow. They thought the cold would shut me down, but it woke me up. I woke up wrapped in the same coat that still carried the smell of yesterday's storm. Margot had left a folded blanket across my legs and a fresh cup of tea on the nightstand, just like someone who knew what survival looked like. I didn't touch the tea yet. My phone, now fully charged, lit up with dozens of missed calls and messages. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't open a single one. Apologies always come in droves. They arrive like junk mail, too late, too forced, and always hoping you'll forget how little they cared until they had something to lose. Margot peeked in. "You all right, sweetheart?" "More than I was last night," I said, managing a small smile. She nodded, hesitated, then said, "Would you want to see the doorbell footage from yesterday? It might help or hurt, but it's there." I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She brought her tablet to the kitchen table. Her hands moved with careful respect. No commentary. No commentary was needed. I watched myself on screen, approaching the front door, knocking, waiting. Then came the porch light. The laughter inside. Bryn's face perfectly framed, mouthing the words I'll never forget, "Freeze to death, worthless idiot." They toasted. They smiled. They never opened the door. The video ended in silence. Margot cleared her throat gently. "Do you want a copy?" "I do." I uploaded it to my drive. No tears, just certainty. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. Back at the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened my inbox. 63 messages. I counted them twice. The first 5, defensive. "You're being dramatic. No one meant it like that." Then came the shift, "Where are you? We're worried. Please just respond." Some were from Mom, some from Dad, most from Bryn. The one that stopped me cold read, "The church board is asking questions. Don't make this public." That was it, wasn't it? Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing face. I screenshot every message, dragged them into a folder labeled Optics Panic, backed up to 2 drives. They taught me to stay quiet. Now I'd teach them what silence costs. I made a list of people, names who had seen, hinted, half-spoken truths over the years, neighbors, friends, the aunt who always meant to check in, the teacher who once asked if everything was okay at home. Then I messaged Nicolette, "I'm ready. Help me build a strategy." This was no longer about a seat at their table. I was building my own room. Before the sun dipped, I drove out to my grandmother's old house. No one had lived there since she passed, but I still had the spare key. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Inside, the air was stale with memory. Furniture draped in dust. I walked straight to the piano she never let anyone touch. I ran my hand along the chipped wood until I felt something underneath, a small envelope sealed and taped beneath the bench. I pulled it free. Inside was a note written in her looping cursive and a USB drive labeled VS just in case. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. The letter was short, "If you're reading this, it means the stories they told weren't enough." I saw it happening, and I wasn't brave enough to stop it out loud. "But I'm giving you back your voice. Whatever's on this drive, use it if you need to. I trust your judgment more than they ever did. I sat at the piano bench, letter in hand, staring at the flash drive. If I press play on this, there's no going back. But maybe I've already left. The invite came through text from Mom, of all people, dinner this Friday, formal, family only. We hope you'll come. It was almost polite enough to believe, if you didn't know what lay beneath her lace tablecloths and manicured grace. But I did. I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing back, I'll be there. No emojis, no thanks, no explanation. If this was the stage they wanted, I was bringing the floodlights. Friday came quickly. I wore navy slacks, a pressed white blouse, hair tied back, clean lines sharp enough to slice through their pleasantries. The USB drive rested in my coat pocket. The envelope, thick with printed evidence, stayed tucked beneath my arm. The house looked exactly as it always had for these gatherings, too clean, too stiff, too curated. Inside, voices floated through the air. Cousins, old church friends, extended relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone dressed their part. Everyone pretending it was just another family reunion until I walked in. A few people glanced up. A few nodded. A few offered hesitant smiles like they were waiting for someone else to make the first move. I said nothing. My father raised a glass. To family, he said loud enough to echo. To forgiveness, and to moving forward. I lifted mine, met his eyes, held it high. Then, without a word, I set the glass back down. What followed wasn't a speech. It wasn't a scene. It was a reckoning. I opened the envelope and began distributing copies, the emails, the screenshots, the inheritance logs, conversations they never thought I'd see. No one said a word. Not at first. Then I connected the tablet to the TV and hit play. The video from the neighbor's camera flickered to life, me on the doorstep, the porch light, their laughter, Bryn's words clear as day, freeze to death, worthless idiot. Aunt Jo dropped her fork. My cousin Leia gasped. Uncle Mike muttered, Jesus Christ. Bryn stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. This is being taken out of context. I turned to her, steady. Sit. You need to hear this, too. And she did. Everyone did. My mother's wine glass trembled slightly in her grip. Her mouth opened once, then closed again. No defense came. No spin, no press release, just silence. Then came the last piece. I've already filed to contest the will, I said, voice even. And I've opened a formal investigation into elder manipulation and fraudulent estate changes. My father stood. Tarun, don't you dare bring lawyers into this family. I didn't flinch. You already did. I'm just matching your energy. The room cracked like glass under pressure. Half the table stood and left, some in disgust, some in disbelief. The others stayed frozen, unsure whether to apologize or pretend they hadn't seen enough. I collected the documents, slid the USB back into my coat. Before walking away, I looked directly at Vera. This isn't revenge, I said. This is me finally turning the volume up on everything you told me to whisper. As I reached the foyer, Bryn stepped in front of me. She looked different, less glossy, less sure. Her voice was low. You have no idea what you've just started, she whispered. I met her gaze without blinking. You're right, but the part you don't know is I have no intention of stopping now. Nicolette's guest bed was barely rumpled when I woke. I hadn't slept much, just laid there motionless, eyes on the ceiling fan, thinking about everything and nothing. The kind of exhaustion that isn't physical. The kind that lives in your bones and remembers every name you were ever called when the door was closed. I reached for my phone. 78 new notifications, texts, emails, missed calls, a few from family I hadn't spoken to in years. Some from people I barely remembered. There was no consistency, no through line of remorse or clarity, just chaos dressed in apology. The first text I opened was from a cousin I hadn't seen since high school. I had no idea. Are you okay? The next one said, this doesn't belong online. You're hurting the family. Another read simply, wow. I closed them all, not out of anger, but out of something deeper, detachment. The truth doesn't bring peace. It brings clarity. And clarity doesn't ask for permission. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the cafe on Ashland. I had agreed to meet Grace there, an old friend, one of the few people who'd seen the bruise on Bryn's wrist years ago and never said a word. She was already waiting at a corner table, stirring a tea she hadn't sipped. She stood when she saw me, didn't smile, didn't cry, just opened her arms. I hugged her. "I saw it," she said as we sat. "I remember everything. I just wasn't brave enough then." Her voice cracked a little. "I'm ready to talk if it helps. If this goes legal, I'll say what I should have said before." I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, not like a wound healing, but like pressure releasing. "Thank you," I said. "That's more than most have ever done." Grace looked at me, eyes sharp. "I believed you. I just didn't know how to say it." That evening, back at Nicolette's, I received another message, this time from Aunt Tilda. The subject line read, "I should have said this sooner." Inside, a paragraph that began with, "I always knew Vera was rewriting people," and ended with, "I stayed quiet because I didn't want to lose what little place I had left. But I realized now what I had wasn't family. It was a front." She had attached a scan of a letter from my grandmother dated 5 years earlier. It warned Tilda that Vera was beginning to shift the narrative again, this time around me. She wants to erase her. She won't do it loudly, but she'll do it thoroughly. I sat with the letter for a long time. Grief and gratitude don't cancel each other out. They just sit beside one another, elbow to elbow, both very real. That night, I pulled out a journal I hadn't written in since college, not to document. This wasn't for evidence. This was for processing. I wrote one sentence and stared at it for a while. They didn't forget me. They trained themselves to ignore me. And now they don't know what to do when I speak. My memory drifted to age 12, sitting across from a school counselor, trying to explain what it felt like to be invisible. I remember her asking, "Can you give me an example?" And I remember whispering, "No one notices when I leave the room, but they notice when I come back." It wasn't about absence. It was about disruption. I had become the interruption to their curated peace. I reached for the envelope I'd pulled from beneath Grandma's piano. My fingers hesitated on the seal as if breaking it meant breaking something sacred. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery and a notarized document. The letter was brief. "Tarun, if you're reading this, it means the silencing worked and now it must be undone. They will try to replace you. They may even convince others that you never existed in this family the way you remember. But this document is real and so are you. You are owed more than presents. You are owed recognition." The legal document was clear, my grandmother's notarized intention to preserve my rights to her assets and her estate should any contest ever occur. I exhaled long, steady. My family thought they buried the truth with her, but she left a shovel in my hands. I signed my name in 3 places, slid the final page across Nicolette's desk, and leaned back in my chair. My hands were steady, my voice calm. "This is the first time in my life I've ever chosen to protect myself first," I said. Nicolette gave a half smile, her eyes scanning the notarized letter from my grandmother, the estate documents, the archived emails. "It's a solid case, Tarun, and long overdue." She slid the folder into her leather briefcase. "They wrote you out. You're writing back in, legally." I left her office and stood outside in the cold. No wind this time, just a gray Chicago afternoon and the steady hum of traffic. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing myself. I was facing forward. On the train ride home, my phone buzzed. The name made my chest pause, Aaron. I hadn't spoken to him in 6 years. Our last conversation was clipped, awkward, and ended with silence that stretched across seasons. I opened the message, saw the clip, the emails. "I'm sorry. I should have said this years ago. Your family didn't scare me off because of you. They drove me away because of them. Your mother told me at dinner, you'll never be part of our bloodline, even if you marry into it. I never forgot that and I never blamed you." I blinked slowly. The train moved on, steady and indifferent. Another message followed, "If you need a statement, I'll write it publicly if needed." I stared at the screen, not out of shock, but because something inside me clicked into a quieter place. Not relief, not anger, Just acknowledgement that the pattern wasn't just mine to carry anymore. By late afternoon, I was back in the old neighborhood, not to see them, just to walk it once more, neutralize it in my memory. I hadn't even made it to the corner before Mr. Rowan, our retired neighbor, called out from his porch. "Tarun," he squinted over his glasses. "Well, I'll be." We talked by the gate. Light snow floated down, slow as time. "I always wondered why you didn't live here anymore," he said. "Figured your folks chased you off. They told folks you were, well, that you weren't right. Said you weren't safe to live with." He looked down. "I never bought it. Not once did you raise your voice. You just looked like a shadow of someone trying not to take up space." My jaw clenched, but again, no tears. He reached into his coat and handed me a folded piece of paper. "If you need someone to say that out loud, I will." I nodded. My voice was thin but strong. "Thank you." That night, I opened my laptop, typed into the bio section of my portfolio site, "You don't need a legacy to build one. Sometimes survival writes its own bloodline." 10 minutes later, a podcast host emailed, "We'd love to hear your story, not just the scandal, your voice." I smiled. I didn't need an audience, but I wouldn't mind a microphone. By 11 p.m., the apartment was quiet. No TV, no music, just the buzz of the fridge and my thoughts soft enough to stay. Then, a knock at the door. 3 short raps. I approached slowly, checked the peephole. Bryn, mascara streaked, hair pulled back like she hadn't tried to fix the unraveling. Her coat hung off her shoulders like she wasn't used to carrying weight anymore. I opened the door halfway. She didn't speak, just handed me a flash drive. Her hand trembled slightly. "You're going to need this," she said. "Just watch it alone." She turned and walked off before I could ask a single question. And for the first time, she looked less like my sister and more like someone who'd finally lost control. The moment the door clicked shut behind Bryn, I slid the deadbolt into place. I drew the curtains closed with practiced hands and just stood there in the quiet, holding the flash drive like it might catch fire in my palm. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My thumb hovered over the metal, the weight of it heavier than its size should allow. Then I crossed the room, sat down at my desk, and plugged it in. Only one file, no label, no folder, just a single video with a timestamp from exactly 1 year ago. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life and filled with an image of my mother, Vera. Her hair was tied back, her face bare, no makeup, no armor. She sat stiffly across from someone off camera. A voice calm and clinical asked her to speak about the expectations placed on children and emotional withholding in family systems, a therapist, most likely. And then she started talking. Not to me, not even about me by name, just the daughter who didn't carry forward the family legacy, the one who failed to meet the image we built. She spoke about disappointment in that tone people use when they're trying not to sound cruel but end up sounding calculated instead. She said she had perhaps misjudged her daughter's motives, that some children just aren't fit to represent what a family stands for. There was no apology, no ownership, just a subtle performance of guilt, a monologue wrapped in soft words, each sentence carefully shaped to avoid responsibility. I watched it all the way through, frozen. Then I watched it again, first as her daughter, then as a witness. Still no tears, no anger, just silence. I sat with my hands folded on the desk, letting her words fall around me like dust. It wasn't meant for me. It wasn't made to heal anything, but it was something. A confession of omission, perhaps. Not enough to fix what was broken, but enough to confirm I wasn't crazy. "Some people never say sorry," I murmured aloud. "They just show you the version of themselves that failed to love you." I didn't send the video to Nicolette. Didn't forward it to the lawyer. I dragged the file into a desktop folder I named Unsaid. That felt truer than anything else. Later that week, Leia finally cut ties with Vera and Alton. She sent me one message: "I'm sorry it took public shame for me to see what you've always carried." I didn't reply with words, just a heart emoji. We both understood words have ceilings. Some truths live outside language. Quietly, without statement or scandal, the church removed Vera from 3 leadership roles. Just like that, no announcement, just absence. That's how families confess without speaking. That's how institutions admit guilt, by rearranging presents. Then came the emails, anonymous but painfully specific. I watched your mother's video. I know that silence, too. My mom erased me every time I tried to speak. I thought I was the only one. 3 women, 3 different states, 3 separate stories, each mirroring parts of my own. I scheduled a call with each, not because I had anything to offer, but because I finally realized sometimes healing starts when the question is shared, not solved. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. Winning in silence isn't loud. It doesn't rush in with banners or closure. It just is, like finally standing alone in your truth and realizing no one else gets to define what peace looks like for you. That night, I opened the old letter from my grandmother again. It had lived beneath the piano for years, hidden where no one looked. I kept it now beside a photo of the 2 of us, one I had packed away during the harder seasons. I read her words again, slower this time. There is power in being the one who remembers. Those words echoed deeper than anything Vera said. The letter ended with this: even if they forget you in every room they stand in, remember who you are when you're alone in yours. I framed it, hung it above my writing desk, not as a shrine, but as a signal, a grounding. That evening, one final email arrived. Subject: Can we talk? From Vera. No message, no signature, just that line. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I deleted it. No anger, no drama, just choice. I used to think silence meant defeat. But now I see silence can be a shield, a choice, a boundary. It's not the absence of a response. It's the refusal to let someone rewrite your worth. I opened a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed Chapter 1. For the ones who were left out of the story, this wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who's ever had to fight to be seen in their own family. To those of us who survived the eraser and chose to remember anyway, the flash drive was still on the desk. Next to it, my grandmother's letter sat folded, edges soft from rereading. I hadn't touched either since the video ended, but their presence felt like a wall between who I was and who I had quietly become. My phone vibrated once. An email from a journalist I didn't know. Subject line: following up on your story. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, eyes scanning the room. My apartment wasn't much, 1 bedroom, thin walls, second-hand furniture, but it was mine. And unlike everything else in my life lately, it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Some truths belong to the courtroom, others to the world. I opened a new browser tab, logged into a writing platform I hadn't touched in months, and typed the title: Erased, but not silent. I started with the facts, the edits, the emails, the legal trail. Then I added my voice, deliberate, steady, rooted not in rage, but in reclamation. Screenshots followed, transcript from the flash drive, the image of the notarized letter from Grandma. I didn't need commentary. I just needed light. By evening, it was live. The post spread faster than I expected. Strangers began to share it, commenting, forwarding, tagging friends with captions like, "I see you. This happened to me, too." She said what I couldn't. Interview requests started coming in: radio, podcasts, morning shows. I turned them all down. They wanted to own the story. I had already built my own platform instead. A few days later, I passed by my childhood church. A new vinyl banner had been hung across the front fence, restoring community integrity. A quiet statement, but one that told me everything I needed to know. Vera and Alton's names had disappeared from the leadership roster. Not a headline, not a scandal, just removed. I stepped inside briefly, not for closure, just curiosity. The church secretary looked up, startled, then unsure. "I'm not here for anyone," I said. "Just thought this belonged somewhere. It might mean something." I slid the original of Grandma's letter across the counter. She opened it, read the first few lines, and looked at me like she wanted to say 100 things but wisely chose silence. I turned and walked out. Later that week, I stood in line at the courthouse. The paperwork was simple: name change request, proof of identification, the notarized intent. The clerk flipped through the forms, raised an eyebrow. "Changing your last name, huh?" "Yes," I said. "May I ask why?" I met her gaze. Because I'm not what they tried to erase. I am what survived it. She nodded, stamped the top page. That's a good reason. And just like that, the name I was born with ended where it should have a long time ago. I didn't shed it to run. I shed it to return to something purer, my grandmother's maiden name, the one no one tried to corrupt. Weeks passed. Spring started whispering promises along the city streets. The air still held winter's edge, but the thaw had begun. I moved into a new apartment, small but sunlit. One framed photo on the wall, Grandma's letter. Beneath it, the piano key I'd kept all these years, not for music, for memory. I made tea. Sat at my new desk. Opened an email from the community center. Subject line, your talk next Thursday. Confirmed. The event title, Family Isn't Always Blood. I smiled. When Thursday arrived, I walked in and found a full room, older women, college students, a few quiet men with stories in their eyes. I stepped up to the podium. No fancy title, no credentials to flaunt, just truth. I opened my notes and began. I didn't win back a family. I didn't need to. I remembered who I was before they told me I wasn't enough. And for the first time, I spoke not to be heard, but to remind someone else they hadn't disappeared.